interesting. Up here is a glass ceiling, and above my head are 6,000 gallons of water. The idea is that if a fire breaks out in here, the water will keep the room relatively cool. But if things get very bad and all these nitrate films ignite, then the ceiling is designed to be the weakest part of the cell. It will break and the flames will rush up and out rather than going to the cells on each side.
The films were buckled and brittle, but crucially, they were the original negatives. The archivists knew that if they could restore them, the results would be amazing. Many of the films had to be printed frame by frame. At 960 frames a minute, the whole collection makes up over 1.5 million frames. The restoration project took just under 3 years. It is now one of the largest collections of early non-fiction films in the world.
Before the discovery, Mitchell and Kenyon were thought to be minor players in early British film, but the find in the Blackburn shop has changed all that. It's put them at the centre of a large group of early filmmakers and has, quite simply, redefined the history of British film.
Moving pictures were one of the technological breakthroughs of the late 19th century. The first moving picture machine was invented in America in 1892. The first film was shown to an audience in Paris in 1895. Cameras at this time were hand-cranked. What we're used to watching from this period are films that are often at the wrong speed. The transfer process enables us to watch the films at virtually the speed they were meant to be shown. James Kenyon, seen here directing mill workers for the camera, went into partnership with Sagar Mitchell just 2 years after the first ever screening of a moving picture. Kenyon had originally made penny in the slot machines, and Mitchell was a photographer. When they set up business in Blackburn, they were right at the beginning of a brand new technology, the internet boom of its time. This was 10 years before Charlie Chaplin made his first movie. Even basic techniques like editing hadn't been developed yet. Like most films of the time, Mitchell and Kenyon's were usually one continuous shot with no close-ups, hardly any camera movement. They were also silent. Many of Mitchell and Kenyon's films were shot as people left work. They were able to pack their shots with as many people as they could squeeze into the frame. They were all potential customers. It was a real novelty to see moving pictures of yourself. They were advertised with posters, and leaflets were handed out giving the dates and times of the shows, proclaiming, "See yourself as others see you." These films would then be projected in fairground tents or local meeting halls because there were no cinemas yet.
Now these films often have scratched on the first frame a bit of information about them. Now let's read this one. Ah yes, Haslam's Limited, Colne, when it was made January the 29th, 1900. So one assumes this is the name of the place being recorded. And let's have a go at another one. This one says, Platt's New Works, Oldham, August the 20th, 1900. So that's all the information we actually have about the films, and that's the information I have got to use to find out more about the people who appear in these films.
Because these films were shot 100 years ago, none of these people are still alive. The best way to find out about them as individuals is to find their children and grandchildren. We sent images from some of the films to local Lancashire papers in the hope that someone would recognise one of the mills or factories. Ron Vickers got in touch with us about his grandfather, William Waterhouse, who worked at Glebe Mills when this film was shot.
That time my grandfather would be a young man of about 21 or 2 at this time, I would think. Well, this looks like it would be lunch hour, because some of them are taking baskets into, I presume, their parents with their lunches, which was a feature of mill work in that era, because there were no canteens, and quite a lot of children used to take dinners to the mill to their parents. My grandfather started as a half-timer in the mills when he was 10, having lost his mother in childbirth at that time. And to help with the sort of family income, it was quite common for children to start work at 10. They were supposed to get permission, but I'm not sure whether many of them did. I think a blind eye was turned to a lot of children working these hours in the mill at that time. The boys here would probably be the half-timers. Some of them will only look 10 or 11, 12 at the most. My grandfather had schooling in the afternoon after he'd worked in the mill in the morning, but that was scanty, and he very often fell asleep during the lessons and got a clip round the ear for his trouble of falling asleep. He'd been up since 6 o'clock in the morning working in the mill. My grandfather left school at 12 to work full-time in the mill. So by today's standards, his education was virtually nil, really. But he overcame that in later life. And was very, very well educated by the time he was in his middle age, shall we say. I think he worked at 5 or 6 mills in his career before eventually he was made manager of the Borough Spinning Company in the late 1930s. And he then was co-opted onto the board of directors, which, considering his early life, was a wonderful achievement.
For people like William Waterhouse, the 1900s were a time of relative prosperity. Britain was still an imperial power, as well as being the world's largest exporter of goods. The biggest export market was cotton to India and China. Bizarre though it may seem today, raw cotton was imported from America, spun and woven into cloth in Lancashire, and then exported to India and the Far East. Cotton made the Lancashire mill owners rich, and it also created a relatively wealthy working class with its own distinct culture. However, ordinary workers had few employment rights and there was no welfare state. There wasn't even a political party campaigning solely for them. The Labour Party was only founded in 1906. This film is of Haslam's cotton mill in Colne, Lancashire. It was shot on Monday the 29th of January 1900 at midday. These men, women and children who work there have just finished half of a 12-hour day and they're on their way home to lunch. They lived very close to the mill. You can see their houses stretching away in the distance. All these workers are wearing clogs with wooden and metal soles. And although the film is silent, the actual sound of all these clogs on the cobbles would have been deafening.
And now it's very quiet here. The mill survives, but the workers' housing has gone, along with the 1,000 men, women and children employed here. This is where they worked. This is where the cotton weaving machines were. This splendid but now rather forlorn space. The unusual thing about the cotton mill, and this seems very odd to us now, is that here men and women worked together in the same space. Very unusual in 1900. Indeed, women usually worked until they got married and then they would stop. But in the cotton industry, women would work, often full-time, from the age of 12, and then would be married, have children,